The HOA president was furious over a pool rule violation. Patricia Wells was known for being strict about neighborhood regulations, but nobody expected what she would do next. When she pointed a gun at 7-year-old Sarah for swimming at the wrong time, everything changed in seconds. Patricia didn't know one crucial thing: Sarah's father was the county sheriff. What happened next shocked the entire community. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The neighborhood was quiet and peaceful on that summer afternoon. The sun was bright, and the air was warm. Sarah, who was only 7 years old, was playing in her family's swimming pool in the backyard. She was laughing and splashing in the water, making small waves with her hands. Her mother, Jessica, sat nearby on a chair, watching her daughter enjoy herself. This was their favorite time of day, just mother and daughter, relaxed and happy. Jessica's husband, Daniel, was at work. He was the county sheriff. He had been working in law enforcement for 15 years. He was known throughout the town as a fair and honest man who treated everyone equally, rich or poor. Jessica always felt safe knowing that Daniel was out there protecting their community. She was proud of her husband and the work he did. But this peaceful afternoon was about to change forever. The gate to the backyard suddenly opened with a loud bang. A woman came storming in. Her name was Patricia Wells. Everyone in the neighborhood called her HOA Karen, because she was the president of the homeowners association, and she was extremely strict about every rule. She complained about everything: the color of people's houses, the height of their grass, the type of flowers they planted. Nobody liked her, but everyone was afraid of her because she could fine people large amounts of money if they broke any rules. Patricia had bright blonde hair, a sharp face, and she was always angry about something. Today, she looked more angry than usual. "Your daughter is swimming at the wrong time," Patricia screamed, pointing her finger at Sarah in the pool. According to HOA rules, swimming is only permitted from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. on weekends. It is currently 4:30 p.m. on a Thursday. Your daughter is breaking the rules. Jessica felt her heart sink. She had read the HOA rules, and yes, there was such a rule, but it seemed completely unfair. Sarah was just a little girl playing in her own pool in her own backyard. What was the harm? "Patricia, this is her home," Jessica said calmly, trying not to show her frustration. "She is just playing in our pool." "I don't think." "You don't think?" Patricia interrupted, her face turning red. "That is exactly the problem. You people never think. You just do whatever you want and ignore the rules that keep this neighborhood nice and organized. Well, I am tired of it. I am tired of people like you who think they are above the rules." Sarah heard the shouting and felt scared. She climbed out of the pool slowly and moved closer to her mother. "Come here, baby," Jessica said, pulling her wet daughter close to her side. To Patricia, she said, "I am sorry if we made a mistake, but there is no need to shout. We can talk about this like adults." "Talk." Patricia's voice became even louder. "You want to talk? There is nothing to talk about. The rules are the rules. You broke them, and now you will be fined $500. That is my final decision." Jessica's anger was building now too. $500 for a little girl swimming in her own pool. This was crazy. But she kept her voice steady. "Patricia, I think you are being unreasonable. My daughter. Your daughter is a rule breaker, just like her mother," Patricia said coldly. "And if you don't pay the fine by tomorrow, I will file a complaint with the city." Jessica stood up, still holding Sarah's hand. "I think you should leave now. This conversation is over." Patricia stared at her for a long moment. Her face was twisted with anger and something else, something darker. She turned and walked back toward the gate. Jessica felt relieved. The awful woman was leaving. Jessica looked down at Sarah and tried to smile. "Don't worry, sweetie. That lady was just being mean. Let's. But Patricia didn't leave. She had gone to her car that was parked on the street outside the gate. And when she came back through that gate, everything changed in an instant. Patricia was holding a gun. It was a small black pistol, and her hand was shaking with rage. Jessica's mind could not understand what she was seeing. This could not be real. This woman could not actually have a gun. But it was real. The gun was there. It was pointed right at them. Sarah screamed. "You think you can disrespect me?" Patricia's voice was now quiet and cold and terrifying. "You think you can talk to me like that in my neighborhood? Nobody disrespects me. Nobody." "Patricia, put that down." Jessica screamed, pulling Sarah behind her body to shield her. Her heart was beating so fast she thought it might explode. Her mind was racing. What should she do? Should she run? Should she call for help? Could she reach her phone? "Don't move," Patricia said, moving the gun toward them. "Don't you dare move or speak." Sarah was crying hard now. She was holding on to her mother so tightly that Jessica could barely breathe. Jessica's mind was working faster than it ever had before, calculating distances and possibilities. They were about 20 feet away from Patricia. If Jessica ran toward the house, Patricia might shoot. If she stayed still, what would happen? Would this crazy woman actually pull the trigger? "Please," Jessica said, her voice shaking. "Please just put the gun down. You don't want to do this. Think about what you are doing." "I know exactly what I am doing," Patricia said. Her eyes were wild now, filled with a rage that seemed inhuman. "I am teaching a lesson. I am showing everyone in this neighborhood that Patricia Wells is not someone to mess with. I am showing everyone that the rules matter. And I am showing your daughter what happens when people break the rules and disrespect authority." Jessica's eyes were filling with tears. She held Sarah even tighter. Then, they heard a sound. A car was pulling into the driveway. Doors were slamming. "Jessica. Sarah. I'm home early." A man's voice called out. It was Daniel. Sarah's father. The sheriff. Daniel came around the corner of the house in his full sheriff's uniform. His badge was shining in the sunlight. His gun was on his belt. The moment he saw the scene, his wife and daughter huddled together, and Patricia holding a gun pointed at them, his entire body went completely still. For 1 second, there was complete silence. Then Daniel's face changed. His jaw clenched. His eyes became hard and cold like steel. In that moment, he was not just a husband and father. He was a trained law enforcement officer who had responded to hundreds of dangerous situations. "Patricia," Daniel said, his voice low and controlled and absolutely terrifying. "Put the gun down. Right now. Do not make me say it again." Patricia's face went white. The blood drained from her cheeks as she realized what had just happened. She had been threatening the wife and daughter of the county sheriff. The man who was in charge of all law enforcement in the entire county. The most powerful lawman in the area. The man who could make her life very difficult. Daniel, I was just. Patricia started to speak, but her voice was shaking. "I said put the gun down," Daniel repeated, and his hand was already moving toward his own weapon. His voice was like ice. "Do it now, or I will make you put it down. Your choice." Patricia's hand trembled. For a moment, it looked like she might actually shoot out of panic and fear. But then, slowly, very slowly, her arm began to lower. Her hand shook so badly she could barely hold the gun. Finally, the gun dropped to the ground. "Step away from the weapon," Daniel commanded. Patricia stepped back, her face now showing pure terror. She had just realized what she had done. She had pointed a gun at the sheriff's daughter. She had threatened the life of a lawman's wife. She had made the biggest mistake of her entire life. Daniel moved forward with the speed and precision of someone who had trained for this exact situation. He kicked the gun away, and with quick, practiced movements, he took control of the weapon and secured it. Then he turned to Patricia. "Put your hands behind your back," he said. Patricia obeyed immediately, her legs almost giving out. She was crying now, not from sadness but from fear and the terrible realization of her situation. Daniel pulled handcuffs from his belt and secured Patricia's wrists behind her back. His movements were professional and cold. He was not thinking of her as his neighbor anymore. He was thinking of her as a criminal who had just threatened his family. "You have the right to remain silent," Daniel said, his voice like a robot reciting words he had said 1,000 times. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." As Daniel continued reading Patricia her rights, he called the police station and requested backup. Within minutes, 2 police cars arrived, and officers took Patricia away in handcuffs. She was crying and pleading, saying she was sorry, saying she had not meant to do anything, but no one was listening to her. Daniel ran to his wife and daughter. He held both of them tightly, and they were all crying and shaking. Sarah could not stop trembling. Jessica could not let go of her daughter. "It's okay," Daniel whispered over and over again. "It's okay. I'm here. You're safe. I'm here." But they all knew that nothing would ever really be okay again. The police investigation took hours. Officers came to the house and took statements from Jessica. They took pictures of the scene. They photographed the gun that Patricia had brought with her. They interviewed neighbors who had heard the screaming. Sarah was examined by a doctor to make sure she had not been physically hurt. The doctor said she was fine physically, but the psychological damage would take much longer to heal. Sarah had witnessed something traumatic that no 7-year-old child should ever see. She had stared down the barrel of a gun. She had been threatened by a neighbor. She would need counseling and support. That night, Sarah could not sleep. She kept having nightmares. She would wake up screaming, thinking Patricia was coming back. Jessica held her through every nightmare. Daniel sat in a chair nearby, unable to sleep as well, his mind replaying the moment when he saw the gun pointed at his family. The news of what happened spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone knew the story. Patricia Wells, the HOA president, had pulled a gun on Jessica and Sarah over a swimming pool rule. And the reason she had been arrested so quickly was because Sarah's father was the county sheriff. The twist that nobody had seen coming, the thing that had saved Jessica and Sarah's lives, was that Patricia did not know who Sarah's father was. Or maybe she did know, but in her rage, she had not cared. Either way, she had made a terrible mistake. Patricia was charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, assault on a child, illegal possession of a firearm in a threatening manner, and several other serious crimes. Her bail was set very high, and she was kept in jail while she waited for her trial. During the investigation, the police discovered that Patricia had a history of mental illness. She had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder many years ago but had stopped taking her medication. She had become increasingly unstable over the past year, becoming more and more obsessed with the rules and more aggressive in enforcing them. The gun had been legally purchased, but she had bought it months ago, stating that she was afraid of home invaders. None of this made what she had done okay. But it helped explain why she had been so angry and so dangerous. The trial took place 3 months later. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that she had been mentally ill and should receive treatment rather than prison time. But the prosecutor was strong and convincing. He showed the jury pictures of Sarah, a small 7-year-old girl who should have been safe in her own backyard. He showed them the gun that Patricia had used to threaten her. He explained how close Sarah had come to being seriously injured or killed. The jury found Patricia guilty on all charges. She was sentenced to 7 years in prison, and she was also ordered to receive psychiatric treatment while she was in prison. As Patricia was led away from the courthouse in handcuffs, she looked at Jessica, Daniel, and Sarah. Her eyes held a mixture of shame, anger, and regret. But there was nothing she could do now. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. In the weeks and months that followed, Sarah struggled with anxiety and fear. She did not want to leave the house. She had nightmares almost every night. She was afraid of loud noises. She was afraid of strangers. Even at school, she would become anxious and upset. But with the help of a good therapist and the love and support of her parents, Sarah slowly began to heal. Daniel spent extra time with her, helping her feel safe again. Jessica took time off work to be with her daughter. They attended family counseling sessions together. Slowly, day by day, Sarah began to trust that she was safe. 6 months after the incident, Sarah went back to the pool. She was nervous at first. She held on to her father's hand tightly. But Daniel stayed with her in the water, encouraging her, showing her that the pool was safe. And gradually, Sarah began to smile again. She began to remember that the pool had once been a place of joy and happiness, not just a place of fear. 1 year after the incident, the family moved to a different neighborhood on the other side of town. The new neighborhood did not have an HOA. Jessica had grown to hate the very idea of homeowners associations. She hated the rules and the way they were enforced. She hated people like Patricia who used rules as a weapon. The new house was smaller and quieter. There was a new pool in the backyard, and Sarah started swimming there with her friends. She was still afraid sometimes, and she still had nightmares occasionally, but she was much better. She was becoming stronger. Daniel threw himself into his work with even more dedication. He started new training programs for police officers about how to respond to mental health crises. He wanted to make sure that situations like the one Patricia had created would be handled better in the future. He wanted to help people who were mentally ill, but also protect innocent people like his wife and daughter. Years passed. Sarah grew older. She became a beautiful, strong young woman. The incident had left scars on her soul, but those scars had made her tougher and more empathetic. She understood what fear felt like. She understood what it meant to survive something terrible. And she used that understanding to help other people. Sarah became a victim's advocate. She worked with people who had experienced violence and trauma. She used her own story to help others understand that they were not alone, and that healing was possible. She became a voice for the voiceless, and she helped many people. Jessica also healed, though it took time. She started a support group for people who had experienced gun violence. She became an advocate for stronger gun laws and for better mental health care. She wanted to make sure that what happened to her family would not happen to anyone else. The pool that Patricia had used as an excuse to pull a gun was eventually removed. Neither Jessica nor Daniel wanted to look at it anymore. The memories were too painful. But they built a new pool in the new house, and in that new pool, Sarah learned to swim again, to play again, to live again. Patricia completed her prison sentence after 7 years. She had received psychiatric treatment while in prison, and she was on medication now. She was no longer the angry, unstable woman who had pulled a gun on a child. But she could never undo what she had done. She could never take back that moment when she pointed a gun at Sarah. After Patricia was released, she moved to a different state. She wanted to start over. She did not want to live in the town where she had committed such a terrible crime. She did not want to face the shame and judgment of her former neighbors. Years went by. Sarah became a teenager. She was 14 years old when she stood up in front of her school assembly and told her story. She talked about the day she was playing in her pool and a neighbor pointed a gun at her. She talked about how scared she had been. She talked about how her father had come home just in time to save her life. She talked about how she had learned to be brave. When Sarah finished speaking, there was complete silence in the auditorium. Then, slowly, people started clapping. They clapped, and many of them were crying. Sarah's story had touched their hearts. They understood that Sarah was not just talking about her own experience. She was talking about something that could happen to anyone. She was talking about how dangerous it can be when people with untreated mental illness are allowed to have guns. She was talking about how important it is to check on your neighbors and make sure they are okay. After her speech, Sarah received many messages from people thanking her for sharing her story. Some people told her that hearing about her experience had helped them understand their own trauma. Other people said they had decided to get help for their own mental health because of what Sarah said. Some people apologized for not recognizing the warning signs of Patricia's mental illness before things got so bad. Sarah's speech was posted on the internet, and it went viral. Millions of people watched it. News reporters called and asked to interview her. She was invited to speak at universities and hospitals and mental health conferences. At 16, Sarah became a national spokesperson for victims of gun violence and for mental health awareness. Daniel was very proud of his daughter. He watched her grow from a traumatized 7-year-old into a brave and powerful young woman. He knew that her ability to turn her pain into purpose was one of the most important things he had ever witnessed. He attended every speech she gave. He sat in the audience with tears in his eyes as he listened to his daughter tell her story to thousands of people. Jessica also watched her daughter grow. She saw how Sarah had taken the worst day of her life and transformed it into something meaningful. Jessica started writing books about her experience. She wrote about what it was like to be a mother who had to protect her child from danger. She wrote about the moment when her husband came around the corner in his sheriff's uniform. She wrote about the journey of healing that came after. Jessica's first book was published when Sarah was 15. It became a bestseller. People all over the country read about what had happened to the family. They read about Sarah's story. They read about how Daniel had handled the situation with professionalism and compassion. The book was chosen for many book clubs, and people discussed it and debated about gun laws and mental health and what they would have done in that same situation. Daniel also made changes in his work. He created a special task force dedicated to responding to mental health crises. He trained officers to recognize the signs of mental illness and to approach situations with compassion rather than aggression. He worked with hospitals and mental health centers to create programs that would help people get treatment before they became dangerous. He was invited to speak at law enforcement conferences all over the country about his new approach. Because of Daniel's work, many lives were saved. People who were struggling with mental illness were identified and given treatment before they could hurt themselves or others. The number of police shootings in Daniels County dropped significantly. Other law enforcement agencies started copying Daniel's methods. What started as a personal tragedy for one family became a movement that changed how police officers responded to mental health crises. When Sarah was 18 years old, she was admitted to Harvard University on a full scholarship. She wanted to study psychology and criminal justice, so she could continue her work helping people who had experienced trauma. The university was very excited to have her. They knew about her story, and they wanted to support her. Sarah's college years were challenging but rewarding. She studied hard. She volunteered at a crisis counseling center. She organized awareness campaigns about gun violence. She worked with victims' advocacy groups. And she continued to give speeches and share her story. At her college graduation, Sarah gave a speech to her graduating class. She talked about how she had come to Harvard as a girl who had survived trauma. She talked about how her experience had shaped who she was and what she wanted to do with her life. She talked about the importance of turning pain into purpose. She talked about how we all have the power to make the world better, no matter where we come from or what we have been through. Her classmates gave her a standing ovation. Many of them had been touched by her story during her time at Harvard. They knew that Sarah was going to do great things. After college, Sarah got a job with a national mental health organization. She helped develop programs to identify and treat people with untreated mental illness. She wrote articles and gave speeches. She became known as an expert on the connection between untreated mental illness and violence. Daniel retired from his job as sheriff at age 62. He had served the county for 37 years. At his retirement party, many people came to pay their respects. They talked about how much he had changed the way police officers approached their work. They talked about how many lives he had saved. They talked about how a personal tragedy had led to a professional transformation that had benefited the entire community. Jessica continued to write and speak. She wrote 3 more books about her experiences as a wife and mother and as a survivor of attempted violence. She started a foundation that provided support and counseling for families who had experienced trauma. She became very successful and well-known. But more importantly, she became a source of hope and comfort for people who were struggling. Sarah got married at the age of 25. Her husband was a psychologist who also worked in the field of trauma and mental health. They understood each other's passion for helping others. They decided to work together to create a new type of therapy program for people who had survived gun violence. Together, Sarah and her husband created the Hope Project, which was a comprehensive program that provided counseling, legal support, and community resources for people who had experienced gun violence. The program was very successful. It was adopted by hospitals and mental health centers all over the country. It helped thousands of people heal from their trauma. 5 years after Sarah started the Hope Project, she received an award from the American Mental Health Association. She was recognized as one of the most important voices for mental health awareness in the country. At the award ceremony, she gave a speech about her journey from trauma to healing to purpose. "When I was 7 years old," she said, "I did not know that a neighbor pointing a gun at me would shape the rest of my life. I did not know that the worst day of my life would eventually lead me to help so many other people. But I have learned that we do not get to choose what happens to us. We only get to choose how we respond to it. My family and I chose to turn our pain into purpose. We chose to use our experience to help others. And that choice has made all the difference." When Sarah finished her speech, the entire audience stood up and applauded. Many people were crying. News reporters were taking pictures and videos. This moment would be shown on television and shared on the internet. This moment would inspire many more people to take action and to speak up about gun violence and mental health. 10 years after the incident at the pool, Sarah was invited back to her hometown to give a special lecture at the local university. The lecture hall was packed. People from the neighborhood came. Teachers came. Police officers came. Even some of the people who had supported Patricia at that time came to listen and to understand what they had been missing. Sarah stood on the stage, now a grown woman of 17, and she talked about forgiveness. She talked about how she had eventually realized that Patricia was sick, that Patricia needed help, not just punishment. She talked about how holding on to anger had almost destroyed her, but learning to forgive had set her free. "I want you to understand something very important," Sarah said to the audience. "The person who pointed a gun at me was not a monster. She was a sick person. She had a mental illness that was not being treated. She had a gun because our laws allow sick people to have guns. And nobody was paying attention to her pain and her struggle until it was almost too late." Sarah paused and looked out at the audience with tears in her eyes. "I am not saying that what she did was okay. It was not okay. But I am saying that we need to do better. We need to pay attention to our neighbors. We need to make sure that people who are struggling mentally are getting help. We need to have better gun laws. We need to make sure that this does not happen to anyone else." Her parents sat in the front row, watching their daughter with so much pride and love. Daniel had his arm around Jessica. They were both crying. This was their daughter. This was the little girl who had trembled in fear by the pool. This was the little girl who had survived something terrible. And now she was a powerful voice for change. After the lecture, many people came up to Sarah to thank her. Some of them were people who had known Patricia. Some of them said they felt sorry for not recognizing that Patricia had been struggling. Some of them said they would pay more attention to their neighbors from now on. Some of them said that Sarah's story had changed their minds about important issues like gun control and mental health. That night, Sarah's family went to dinner at her favorite restaurant in the town. They sat together and talked and laughed. Daniel told stories about his work as a sheriff. Jessica shared funny memories from Sarah's childhood. Sarah talked about her dreams for the future. It was a normal family dinner, but it felt special because they knew how close they had come to never having moments like this again. "I want to thank you both," Sarah said to her parents. "For everything. For protecting me. For supporting me. For helping me turn my pain into something good." Daniel reached across the table and held his daughter's hand. "We would do anything for you," he said. "Always." Jessica smiled through her tears. "You are so brave, Sarah. So brave." Years later, when Sarah was in her 30s, she would be invited to the White House to meet with the president. She would be asked to help develop national policies on gun violence and mental health. She would receive numerous awards and honors. She would help change laws and save countless lives. But the most important thing to her was not the awards or the recognition. The most important thing was that day by the pool, when her father came around the corner in his sheriff's uniform, and in that moment, everything changed. In that moment, she learned that even in our darkest times, there is hope. In that moment, she learned that survival is possible. In that moment, she learned that pain can be transformed into purpose. The pool that started as a place of terror became a place of healing. The neighborhood that was divided by an act of violence became united in a desire for change. The family that almost lost everything became stronger than they had ever been. And Sarah, the little girl who survived the gun at the pool, became a woman who changed the world. She became proof that even the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best parts of our futures. She became a voice for the voiceless, a hope for the hopeless, and a light in the darkness. The story of the HOA Karen who pointed a gun at the pool is not just a story about tragedy. It is a story about survival. It is a story about healing. It is a story about a family that chose love over fear, purpose over pain, and hope over despair. It is a story that reminds us all that no matter what happens to us, we have the power to choose how we respond. We have the power to turn our pain into purpose. We have the power to change the world. And that is the most important lesson of all. The real story, though, is not about Patricia. The real story is about Sarah and Jessica and Daniel. It is about a family that survived the worst day of their lives and came out stronger. It is about a little girl who was terrorized by a gun but who learned to be brave again. It is about a mother who protected her child with her own body. It is about a father who came home just in time to stop a tragedy. And it is about the realization that sometimes, the thing that saves you is not what you expect. Sarah was saved not by running away or by being stronger or by luck alone. She was saved because her father was a sheriff. She was saved because that woman did not know who her father was, and when he showed up in his uniform with his badge and his authority, Patricia was too afraid to do anything but surrender. This is a story about how power dynamics can shift in an instant. It is a story about how knowing the right person at the right time can literally save your life. It is a story about the dangers of mental illness left untreated. It is a story about the responsibility that comes with making and enforcing rules. But most of all, it is a story about a family that faced terror and came out the other side. It is a story about survival, about healing, and about the power of love to overcome even the darkest moments. The pool is gone now, but the memory remains. The gun is in an evidence room somewhere, a reminder of what could have happened. Patricia is somewhere out there, trying to live a normal life, haunted by what she did. But Sarah is alive. She is happy. She is strong. And that is what matters most. The neighborhood eventually got a new HOA president, someone more reasonable and more fair. The swimming pool rule was changed to be less strict. New neighbors moved in. Life went on. But for the family whose daughter stared down a gun barrel, life was never quite the same. They had seen how quickly everything could change. They had understood how fragile life really is. And they had learned to hold each other closer and to appreciate every single moment they had together. That is the true story of the HOA Karen who pulled a gun at the pool. That is the story of what happened when she did not know that the little girl's father was the sheriff.